So today we'll be talking about Brazilian scholars in international journals, and we'll be reporting on two studies that we conducted together. So a brief outline of the webinar, the way we're going to do this today. So, sorry, Katia, if you could just go back one slide. Yes, so I just want to say also, you can see that the talk of the webinar, focusing on Brazilian scholars in international publications is not a part of my core research focus or Katia's core research focus, but we chose that because we thought it would be more relevant to this webinar. So, and as I mentioned, we collaborated on two projects in this topic. So the outline of the webinar will be the following. We will have essentially two parts. So initially, we'll talk about the presence of Brazilian scholars in international journals. This is the result of a survey that we conducted. And I'll start with a brief literature review and methodology, and then Katia will take over and she will present findings and discussion. And then the second part of the webinar, which is a little shorter, we'll talk a little bit about rhetorical differences in English and Brazilian Portuguese. Katia and I did an exploratory study looking at research article introductions in these two languages, and we found some differences that we'd like to share with you. So starting the first part, so we'll be talking about the case of Brazil, which is, as the title says, kind of like we have a so Brazil is considered semi-periphery. I'll talk about it in a minute, but we found that within Brazil, we have a periphery inside a semi-periphery, and that's what we'll be talking about. So as you all know, of course, English is an academic lingua franca, which, so data has shown that if you look at journals in sciences, in social sciences, in the arts and humanities, you can see that between 65% to 88% of all journals are published primarily or exclusively in English. And what happens with these publications is that there is a dominance of scholars from the center, which would be Anglophone countries or most countries in Western Europe. So scholars from this country appear in these publications much more frequently than scholars from other parts of the world. And they usually hold gatekeeping positions in this process, right? So as reviewers, as editors. So the field of ERPP, English for Research Publication Purposes, has been exploring how multilingual scholars respond to this trend. And this study that we are presenting today then fits in the ERPP literature. So the multilingual scholars from the center, so you can see here in these, and I must say, Katia did all the design of the PowerPoint slides. My slides are always very boring, but Katia always has really good graphics, and she just makes it much prettier. So you can see this very pretty design that we have on the right. So the center is the, as I said, Anglophone countries or countries from Western Europe. So these are countries that are economically advantaged with infrastructure and culture to disseminate academic knowledge, right? So multilingual scholars from the center, they also perceive challenges in publishing in English internationally, but overall, they accept English as the academic lingua franca. Now, in contrast to the center, we have the semi-periphery of the academic world. So the semi-periphery are countries in which the scholars have occasional appearances in international journals, and the countries themselves are not as structured as the center, but at the same time, they're not as unstructured as very poor nations, say like in Africa. Katia, if you could just move on to the next slide, please. Okay, thank you. And it includes, what they call fast developing nations, such as Mexico, countries in Southern Europe or East Europe, or Asian countries, as well as Brazil, right? So Brazil is considered to be part of the semi-periphery. And what the literature has shown is that there's a lot of variation among countries in the semi-periphery in how present they are in terms of international publishing. And there's also a lot of variation within countries, which is what we'll be talking about. So moving on, the multilingual scholars from the periphery have become more accepting of English as academic lingua franca because it's really difficult to escape this reality. At the same time, they tend to be more critical of the dominance of English, right? And so the 𝗟𝗵𝗃 literature has surveyed several countries around the world, like Romania, Turkey, Poland, and some countries like Korea and Hong Kong. They have found that scholars in these countries, they have the structural support, but they are under a lot of pressure to publish. And scholars, for example, in Mexico, Oman, or Indonesia, they lack the resources to publish or to do research, and they are under a high level of anxiety to publish internationally. So everybody feels the pressure to publish internationally because of English being the lingua franca. And in many countries, in many realities, publication in international journals is tied to promotion, tenure, and other levels of scholarship. So the case of Brazil. So like it has happened all over the world, the same has happened in Brazil, that there has been an increasing influence of English in the academic world, although the internationalization process in Brazil has been slower compared to other parts of the world. And 5% of Brazilians are considered to speak English fluently. There has been an increasing number of universities that have been using English as a medium of instruction. I think when I left Brazil about 18 years ago, there were very few, if any, university that was using English as a medium of instruction. There are even PhD programs now requiring publication in international journals for degree completion. So I can see that in the past, say, 20 years, there's been a steady move towards English being more prevalent in academic contexts. And among world publications, according to the NSF, Brazil is responsible for 2.2% of sciences publications and 1.4% of the social sciences publications. So that's pretty low considering the size of the country.
Indeed, I think the US contributes 30% of the publications in social sciences, which is much higher, right?
Yeah.
All right, so in our study, we performed a survey. We distributed the survey to several scholars in Brazil, to more than 1,000, I can't even remember, but we sent so many emails from private and public universities in Brazil and located in different geographical regions in Brazil. And the survey focused basically on 4 major topics: the practices, challenges, strategies, and motivations. And we addressed those 3 topics in the 4 research questions we have. So in the first research question, what are the publication practices of Brazilian scholars by disciplinary fields? So we divide the survey by disciplinary fields. The second research question, what are the challenges that these scholars face when dealing with gatekeepers in international journals? The third research question, what are the strategies that Brazilian scholars adopt to write manuscripts in English and publish internationally? And the fourth question, what would motivate scholars to increase their international publication? All right, so these are the demographics. So even though we sent a lot of emails, more than 1,000, we got responses from 290 participants. The majority of them were from the humanities, but we also got a good amount of scientists from the biological sciences and also the exact sciences. The majority, 221 or 76%, attempted to publish in English, and from the 24% that didn't attempt, the vast majority, about 92%, were from the humanities. So we already we start seeing a difference here across disciplines in terms of the presence in the international community. 214 participants worked in public institutions. Again, we sent a lot of invitations to private and public ones, but we got more responses from public institutions. The vast majority, the majority were males, almost 62%. The vast majority had a doctorate degree, and 71% had not studied abroad at the time of the survey. So to address the first research question regarding the practices of the Brazilian scholars by disciplines, we asked participants to name their preferred language for publication. So what they think would be the best language to use for publication. And as you see here, English is heavily preferred by both the biological scientists and also the exact scientists. And in the humanities, we also see that most of the scholars prefer English, 55%, but they also prefer other languages, especially Portuguese. But there is a heavy preference for English in the biological sciences and in the exact sciences. So regarding the exact same research question and regarding the practice, we also asked them to give us the number of publications that they have in each language. And as you can see here, even though English is heavily preferred in the biological sciences and in the exact sciences, there is still a lot of publication. There are many publications in Portuguese, right? 36 in the biological sciences, and in the exact sciences, 33%. But in the humanities, 84% of the publications are in Portuguese, and there is a more balanced distribution regarding other languages, but English is the second one. So what we start to see here is that there is the field of arts and humanities is more in a more peripheral position compared to the biological sciences and the exact sciences. So it's still the same research questions regarding the practices. In an open-ended question, we asked them to explain why they selected the language that they named as the preferred one. So when they selected English, the reason for selecting English was that this language can reach a wider audience and establish a dialogue with international community. And other reasons was that English has become the academic lingua franca, or there was just a lack of choice. Many scholars, they don't have an option, right? They either publish in English or they don't publish. So overall, we see that the scholars, they choose English to reach a wider audience, to keep contact with the international community. I found this comment by a scholar in the applied linguistics field, our field, Eliana and mine, that summarizes, I guess, this issue of language choice, right? So the scholar said, publications in Portuguese are important because we need articles that can be read, discussed in Brazilian educational settings where the language is used by the majority of the people. Publications in English favor the researcher author because the articles can be read, discussed by an international audience. Also, universities and funding agencies favor publications in English. What is at stake, therefore, is the researcher's CV. So while Brazilian Portuguese is to target the local community, English is to favor the CV of the researcher. And this person said it all. So now research question number 2, regarding the challenges that the Brazilian scholars have when dealing with gatekeepers in international journals. They were asked about the reasons their articles got rejected. And as you can see here, for those in the biological sciences, which is highlighted in this orange salmon color, the primary reason for rejection is that the article did not meet the journal expectations. And behind this choice, there can be many factors, right? It can be related to content, the journal has a lot of publications that are, or it can be language issues. We don't know, it's a very broad comment, but this was the preferred choice by both the biological scientists and also, as we can see in this brown color here, for the exact scientists, also the topic, the option, the article did not meet the journal expectations was also the most common. However, for those scholars in the arts and humanities, highlighted here in blue, this dark blue, language-related problems were more prevalent than other topics. So we start seeing here again differences between the disciplinary fields. So in an open-ended question, the scholars were asked to explain what the comments from the referees, and I found those that these comments here, they explain a little bit of the challenge that the scholars face. So here, a comment by a biological scientist said, this scholar said, in general, the gatekeepers mentioned experiments that could not have been performed in our labs. That is, a technological deficit exists. So before we saw that they selected mostly that the article did not meet the expectations of the journal, and many of the scholars and the biological scientists named lack of technology, this material resources deficit, which can partially explain why the articles are rejected, probably because they don't have the resources to perform state-of-the-art research. Here is a comment about from a historian saying, in the humanities, I believe the difficulty in writing in English is even worse because the texts are longer and not very schematic. So as we saw before, language-related problems is one of the reasons, the primary reasons for rejections in arts and humanities, according to the respondents, of course. And I like this comment because the scholar explains that it's not only about not knowing the language, but it's also about the rhetoric, like the style. It's much more difficult to write in the humanities, where it relies in argumentation, and it's a lot about the writing and less about, you cannot rely as much on boilerplate language, for example. So this can be a reason for why they select language related problems. So this is a comment from an exact scientist from the physics. The scholar said, I don't have problems with the language, but I believe that there is a certain prejudice, and this is the respondent's quotes, towards unknown scholars. Normally, I encounter published articles that are simple and with little argumentation being published in important journals, but when we try to publish a manuscript with good argumentation, we still receive many criticisms and requests to add certain citations to the manuscript. So this is a common topic actually in the survey we'll see later, this perceived prejudice that may be behind this issue here, that the article did not meet the journal expectations. All right, so now research question number 3. What are the strategies that Brazilian scholars adopt to write manuscripts in English and publish internationally? To address this question, we asked the scholars about the strategies used to write manuscripts. For the majority of the scholars, they write the manuscript in English and ask someone to edit it. So they rely, at least partially, on their own linguistic resources, and then they ask a language broker to edit it, right? But you can see here, for the scholars in the arts and humanities, many of them write the manuscripts in Portuguese and then have someone translate it. So even though there is this reliance on language brokers in all disciplines, this reliance on their own linguistic knowledge in all disciplines, it seems that those in the arts and humanities rely a little bit more in language brokers and translators and reviewers and so on. Now the last question, what would motivate the scholars to increase their international publications? We asked them about the motivators to publish internationally. And for the scholars in the biological sciences, the biggest motivation was more acceptance of Latin American work. And this actually was an item that we created based on a survey that a pilot study that we did, and this was a very common topic in the survey, and we added this to the final version of the survey, and it was a very common topic among biological scientists, an option that was selected frequently by biological scientists. And for the scholars in the arts and humanities, they say that institutional support with translating and writing would motivate them to publish a little more. For those in the exact sciences, the motivators lie elsewhere. Unfortunately, due to a problem in the survey setup, we couldn't gather qualitative data for this response. But they also named other reasons, such as more acceptance of Latin American work and more pressure from the department to publish. At the end of the survey, the scholars were also asked if they had any additional comments, and we got some interesting comments from the respondents, like this one from a scholar in the field of education and law. He or she said, the comments by reviewers refer to the fact that the research questions were local and that they were not relevant to an international community. I did not agree with the comments because there is a relationship between the local, regional, global knowledge, which is important for the advancement of science. This topic, which is called in the ERPP literature as parochialism, or the focus on the local, was not very common in the survey, but it's a very common topic in the literature. And I think that is very interesting, the point that the scholar makes, that it's important for international journals to be accepting of local research, because no research is performed in a vacuum. Therefore, it's also relevant to an international community. Here, a comment by from a scholar in the psychology and education. I think international publication is relevant and necessary, but I believe that English is not the only language to be privileged. Portuguese is also important for work focusing on Portuguese-speaking countries in Africa. I think it's important to decolonize science, and the language is one way to do it. So I also thought it was this advocacy, like this person worried about the prevalence of English as something that can be detrimental for many scholars, and the importance of also using Portuguese and not only English. We also got some comments, a few, not many, questioning any language-related difficulties or issues among scholars. And there is one here from a scholar from immunology and virology. He or she said, after observing my peers' experiences and my own, and after having worked as an editor and reviewer for international journals in my field, I have never seen a Brazilian paper being rejected because of language, even if it was poorly written. If the data were interesting and reliable, the authors usually have a chance to correct language issues after submission. So we start seeing here that it's not only language, it's also, as we mentioned previously, other types of resources related to, for example, equipment and to pay for literacy brokers and other things. So just to sum up all this, there were many findings. It's hard to pack everything into one presentation, but basically there were these 4 topics in the survey: practices, challenges, strategies, and motivations. And what we can see when we look at all the disciplines is that there is kind of like a different degrees of participation. We see that the exact scientists, they seem to have a heavier participation, so they are in this more semi-peripheral position, right, where they still publish in Portuguese, they find difficulties to enter the international communities, but they are there and they are insisting. We see the biological scientists, they are also there and they are trying, but they seem to perceive a little bit more problems. And we see that the humanities, half didn't even try to publish internationally, and the ones who did seem to face many issues, especially regarding language. So we see that in the exact sciences, they reported the largest presence in the international community. They reported more rejections, but fewer challenges. Maybe the rejections are related to the insistence on publishing. They tend to rely on their own linguistic resources much more than the other scholars, and they persist in face of negative comments. And the motivations, unfortunately, are unknown because of a problem with the survey. For the biological scientists, they also have substantial international participation according to the self-reported data. They reported more challenges, including a perceived prejudice against Latin American work, which was more common in this field, which for us was surprising. You would expect this type of comment from scholars from the humanities, but it came mostly from scholars from the biological sciences. Most of them, of the biological scientists, they rely on their linguistic knowledge. And they say that as motivations, there should be more openness to Latin American work. Yeah, that's it. In the humanities, the presence is much weaker. And regarding the challenges, the most cited issue was linguistic and rhetoric related. They rely more on language brokers for translations and reviews and so on. And for them, the biggest motivation would be international support, institutional support from their departments, for example. Another thing that was interesting regarding the humanities is that this lack of support or pressure from the department actually was not always seen by scholars in the humanities as something negative, right? Because maybe they are not as internationalized or it's because I guess a lack of pressure is also good, right? So since there is not this pressure, sometimes they saw it as a good thing. But one point that we make in the article, Eliana and I, one argument that we made is that even if the scholars in Brazil, that they are not missing a lot from that, I think that the international community might be missing when they preferred publications from the center and not from the semi-periphery or the periphery. So for us, it is a loss for the international community. So I guess 4 major topics there that we would like to highlight. Something that surprised us is that the majority of the respondents named English over Portuguese as the preferred language for publication, which was surprising, especially in the field of humanities. The survey also reveals some perceived reservations towards gatekeepers, which is not uncommon, right? And you would expect, especially in Latin America, because we have this, again, this I wouldn't say anger towards the colonizers, but something between these lines. We also found that material resources related to investment in research, such as equipment, seemed more relevant than linguistic resources, which is also a big topic in the ERPP literature. There's not only about knowing how to write, but also other the researchers need much more than linguistic resources. They also need material resources. And overall, it seems that despite the challenges, and there seem to be many, publishing internationally is becoming part of the disciplinary culture in Brazil. But we see that inside this semi-peripheral country that is Brazil, it seems that the humanities are still in a peripheral position, but publishing much less and facing a little bit more issues than other scholars.
All right, so I'll take over again. Is my face not showing because we are sharing your screen, Katia? Is that what the deal is?
I don't think so. It depends on how
I can see your face.
Oh, you guys can see my face? Oh, good.
Now I can only...
All right, so very good. Thank you. So as Katia mentioned, the arts and humanities had more challenges publishing in English, and when they were asked what were some of the biggest hurdles that they faced, they mentioned language and rhetoric, right? So I'm going to present a study that Katia and I worked on that looked at the rhetorical differences in English and Brazilian Portuguese. It is more of an exploratory study, but I think it gives us some ideas of what the issues might be. So we looked at research article introductions that were written in English and in Brazilian Portuguese in the specific field of linguistics/applied linguistics. And we used the 𝗟𝗪𝗋𝗂 model as the analytical tool. So I'm going to talk a little bit about why we worked on introductions and what the 𝗂𝗪𝗋𝗂 model is like. So according to 𝗟𝗪𝗋𝗂, the introduction of a research article is very important because it reestablishes the importance of the field, and it's also the opportunity for the author to situate the actual research in terms of the field. In other words, it gives the author the opportunity to indicate the niche, and it also gives the author an opportunity to explain how this niche will be occupied by the current article, right? So 𝗟𝗪𝗋𝗂 empirically looked at several research article introductions in different fields, and he identified 3 moves. It's in the next slide. Katia, can you move on? Oops, thank you. So he identified 3 moves in research article introductions. So move 1, he called establishing a territory, move 2, establishing a niche, and move 3, occupying the niche representing the present work. So, and he said that in general, research article introductions had these 3 moves, and in general, they followed this specific order in the introductions that he looked at. And within each move, there are several different steps, but we're just going to look at the 𝗂𝗪𝗋𝗂 model as an analytical tool at the level of the moves, because that's where we already found differences. So the data that we used for the analysis were 50 research article introductions. There are 10 from each of these journals. So we looked at the specialist, which is Brazilian Portuguese, 𝗵𝗂𝗋𝗂𝗧, also Brazilian Portuguese. We looked at the English articles from the 𝗵𝗂𝗃 𝗪𝗂, and then we looked at ESPJ, English for Specific Purposes Journal, which is English and International, and the Modern Language Journal, English International. So in total, we had 50 research article introductions. And just so in terms of data analysis, if you're not familiar with the 𝗏𝗏 model, here we have an example of each move. So move one, establishing a territory. So in this introduction, the authors wrote, so as interest in writing convention grows, contrastive analysis of various languages/cultures have revealed a number of important distinctions in the practice of writing. So the person is establishing the territory, is saying what the field is about. And then you move two, then they said there are, however, which is, you know, the however is a big marker for establishing a gap. There are, however, a number of languages such as Slovene for which relatively little is known about their writing conventions. So here the author has established a niche, and then you move three, the author is now going to occupy the niche. So they say, this study explores the similarities and differences in the use of selected writing conventions in English and Slovene research articles. So starting by saying this study, the author is then occupying the niche that they showed as a gap in move two, right? So according to Swales, most research article introductions would follow move one, move two, move three in this order. So we looked at the those 50 research article introductions, and what we're going to do here is we have a slide for each of the journals. As you can see, there are 10 introductions, and I'd like to focus on the third column, the column of the moves, and I'd like you to pay attention to two things. The number of moves in an introduction. So for example, this is the specialist. I'm quite sure you all know it's a Brazilian journal. So notice that 3 out of the 10 introductions only have one move, right? A move 1 or a move 3. And then I'd also like you to pay attention to the move 2, which I highlighted in red. So out of the 10 introductions, only 3 of them contain move 2, right? So the next journal is 𝗵𝗂𝗃. So you can see that there are more moves per introduction in these articles from the 𝗵𝗂𝗃. But also you'll see that only 4 of these 10 introductions contain a move 2, right? So slightly more than the specialist, but still only 4 out of 10. So then we move on to the Delta, which is a Brazilian journal, but we selected articles in English from this journal. So you can see that there is one article that only has a move 3, and also only 4 out of the 10 introductions contained a move 2, right? And also here, even though the article's in English, you can see that the institutional affiliation of 7 of the authors was a Brazilian institution. And then there was somebody that's working in Argentina, somebody in Chile, and somebody from the UK. Now we move on to the articles from international journals. So this is the ESPJ. Notice how there are a lot more moves per in each introduction. There are no introductions with just one move, and we have move 2 in 9 out of the 10 introductions. And in many of the introductions, we have repeated move 2s, right? With the ESPJ 9 at the bottom being a very long introduction with several moves. And then lastly, we have the Modern Language Journal, also an international journal. And you'll see that there are no articles with just one move again. And we have a move 2 again in 9 out of the 10 introductions, with many of the introductions having repeated move 2s, right? So just summarizing then these findings, we see that the frequency of move 2 is heavily prevalent in international journals such as ESPJ and the Modern Language Journal, but much less so in Brazilian journals like the Specialist or 𝗵𝗗𝗃𝗪 or 𝗪𝗃𝗪. Of course, you know, we sampled 10 introductions from each of these journals, so this is not to say that this is always the case, but it does seem to indicate, you know, our data does seem to indicate that there is a striking difference in the presence of 𝗪2. And also, as I mentioned, there were the international articles had more moves per introduction than the Brazilian articles. Actually, I did the math, and the average number of moves in Brazilian Portuguese was 2.9, so less than 3, and the average number of moves in English was 4.9, you know, so less than 4. So, this finding is actually quite common in the ERPP literature, that in other languages, there seems to be less use of 𝗪2 when compared to English introductions written in English. So there have been several potential explanations for this fact. One that's been, you know, repeatedly used is the emerging status of research. And as a Brazilian, I don't think that would apply to the field of applied linguistics or linguistics. But the second potential explanation, which is solidarity with the local research community and an attempt to avoid confrontation, is an explanation that might make more sense, in the sense that we might, as Brazilians, we might find it uncomfortable to find fault with the literature in our country or with the work of our colleagues because we are such a small community. So that's possible. And also that, you know, the academic conventions might just be different. So, you know, going back to the point that Katia made earlier of the Brazilian scholars in the arts and humanities having less of a presence in the international academic world, this is perhaps one factor that can play a role in what the challenges that they face. I think one of the comments that Katia mentioned also was the fact that in the sciences, the writing is more schematic, whereas in arts and humanities, the writing itself is very important for you to make the point, right? So if you're writing an article in the hard sciences, perhaps with data, with numbers, with graphics, you can explain what you mean. But in the arts and humanities, if your rhetoric or if your language is not clear, then the reviewer might not even understand the significance of your work. So it seems that, you know, our data points to a difference in the academic writing conventions in English and in Brazilian Portuguese. And of course, this has pedagogical implications for all of you in case you want to publish internationally, but also if you teach English and if you teach academic writing courses, that it's important to point out that the way we write in Brazilian Portuguese may be different from the way that we should write in English. So these are the main ideas that we had to share with you. So we have quite some time for questions. Well, not that, I guess 15 minutes, for questions and comments. So thank you.
For your own experience publishing.
Yeah.
Very much. Thank you very much.